Muammar Gaddafi began life not as a tyrant, but as a barefoot child in Libya's desert, dreaming of freedom from foreign rule. Long before he became a global pariah, he was celebrated as a revolutionary liberator, a young officer who toppled a king without bloodshed, launching a wave of anti-colonial hope. Yet the story behind his rise has been buried by the infamy that followed. How did a poor Bedouin turn Libya's fate upside down? And why has his early idealism been forgotten? The answers reveal a side of Gaddafi most people have never seen. Muammar Gaddafi's world began under the wide open sky of the Libyan desert. Born around 1942 in a Bedouin tent near Sirte, he grew up surrounded by sand, wind, and the daily rhythms of nomadic life. His father, a herder of goats and camels, could not read or write. The family's possessions fit easily into a few bundles, and their home moved with the seasons. Water was drawn from wells, and food came from what the land and herd could provide. In these early years, Gaddafi learned the values of endurance, loyalty to tribe, and a deep suspicion of outsiders, qualities that would shape his view of the world. Education began at home, with the Quran as his first textbook. Sitting on woven mats, he listened as a local teacher recited verses and taught him to read and write Arabic. By age 9, Gaddafi left the tent behind for Sirte's elementary school. The transition was harsh. As a Bedouin child among city dwellers, he was marked by his accent, his clothing, and his poverty. Classmates teased him, and teachers sometimes overlooked him. He pressed on, determined to prove himself and to change the course of his life. Determined is the word that follows those early years. His family later moved south to the town of Sebha in the Fezzan region. Sebha was a crossroads, a place where desert tribes, merchants, and soldiers mingled. Here, the young Gaddafi encountered new ideas. Egyptian teachers sent by Cairo spoke of Arab unity and the dream of a world free from colonial rule. At night, the voices of Gamal Abdel Nasser and other Arab leaders crackled over the radio, carried by the wind into the darkness of the desert. Those broadcasts stirred something in him, a sense that the world could be different, that Libya's poverty and humiliation were not inevitable. Unity and national dignity began to take shape in his imagination. In Sebha's classrooms, Gaddafi watched the sons of tribal chiefs and wealthier city families take privileges for granted. He felt the sting of being an outsider, yet he also saw the power of education and organization. He began to gather a small circle of friends and quietly discuss the injustices they saw around them. Even then, the seeds of rebellion were taking root. The lessons of the desert, self-reliance, pride, and a deep loyalty to one's people combined with the promise of Arab nationalism to forge a young man restless for change. Rebellion was not yet a plan, but it had become a conviction. By 1963, Muammar Gaddafi had set his sights on the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi. The academy's stone corridors echoed with the footsteps of young men from every corner of Libya, each hoping to rise above the old divisions of tribe and class. Gaddafi, still marked by his Bedouin roots, quickly stood out, not for his background, but for his discipline and the intensity of his convictions. He was not interested in the parties and city nightlife that drew many cadets. Instead, he spent long evenings organizing secret meetings, drawing together a handful of trusted classmates who shared his anger at Libya's monarchy and its ties to the West. Inside the academy, Gaddafi found the perfect environment for his plans. The curriculum was strict and technical, with a special emphasis on signals training, learning how to coordinate troops, intercept communications, and manage the flow of information in battle. It was here that he first mastered the tools that would later prove essential to seizing power. Instructors described him as cheerful, hard-working, and unusually focused for his age, qualities that disguised the seriousness of his ambitions. After graduating in 1965 as a signals officer, Gaddafi was selected for a brief training course in the United Kingdom. For several months, he studied communications and military tactics under British instructors. The experience sharpened his technical skills and exposed him to the inner workings of a modern army. He returned to Libya with a new sense of confidence, ready to put theory into practice. Back home, Gaddafi and his inner circle, later known as the Free Officers, tightened their bonds. They pooled their salaries in secret, using the money to fund clandestine meetings and to support families of imprisoned activists. Their network grew, cell by cell, always hidden from the watchful eyes of the monarchy's intelligence services. The group rejected tribal favoritism and personal gain, demanding absolute loyalty to the cause of national liberation. In the early hours of September 1st, 1969, years of careful planning came to a head. While King Idris was out of the country, tanks and armored vehicles rolled quietly into the streets of Benghazi and Tripoli. Gaddafi and his fellow officers seized key government buildings and communication centers without bloodshed. At around 2 in the morning, a calm but determined voice broke through the static on Radio Benghazi. "People of Libya, your free revolutionary forces have carried out their duty. King Idris has been deposed." By dawn, crowds were flooding the streets, celebrating the end of the monarchy. Gaddafi, just 27 years old, had become the face of a new ERA, one built on the promise of unity, independence, and social justice. In the first weeks after the revolution, Libya's new leaders set their sights on the country's greatest resource. Oil had transformed the coastal cities, but left much of the population in poverty. Under the monarchy, foreign companies from Britain, the United States, and Italy controlled the wells and dictated the terms. Now the Revolutionary Command Council moved quickly to rewrite the rules. The first step was legal. Decrees issued in July 1970 expanded the National Oil Corporation, known as NOC, giving it sweeping authority over exploration, production, and export. Overnight, subsidiaries of Esso, Shell, ENI, and others were merged into state-run companies. The government announced that Libyan oil would no longer be sold on foreign terms. Instead, the state would set prices and manage every barrel. Negotiations with the oil majors were tense. In December 1971, Libya seized all assets of BP exploration company Libya Limited, withdrawing over $500 million from British banks in a single move. The message was clear: control of the country's wealth would rest in Libyan hands. Over the next 2 years, the government demanded and won majority stakes in nearly every foreign operation. By September 1973, a 51% participation law made the state the dominant partner in all oil ventures. Companies that resisted, like Texaco and California Asiatic, saw their remaining shares nationalized in early 1974. These were not just symbolic gestures. Oil revenues, once siphoned offshore, now flooded into government accounts. Annual income soared from about $1 billion in 1969 to more than $4 billion by 1973. The price of Libyan crude, set above Gulf rates, earned a premium on world markets. Even as production declined during the oil embargo, the surge in prices kept the treasury full. The new fiscal order did not stop with oil. Land reforms targeted royal estates and Italian settler properties, transferring ownership to the state or redistributing it to Libyan farmers. The government abolished personal income taxes, relying almost entirely on oil to fund its ambitions. Ministries, many headed by Gaddafi's closest allies, drew up budgets that promised to transform daily life. Economic ministers such as Prime Minister Abdul Salam Jaloud became the architects of this transformation. They oversaw the flow of oil money into state coffers and directed spending toward projects that would soon touch every Libyan home. The machinery of nationalization was both a tool of sovereignty and the financial engine for sweeping reforms. By the mid-1970s, the promise of a new social contract rested on the foundation built by these fiscal takeovers. Libya in the early 1970s was a country in motion, fueled by new oil wealth and a sense of possibility. Gaddafi's government set out to prove that independence could deliver more than just a change of flag. One of the first promises made was to bring basic services to every corner of the country, no matter how remote. In villages where children had never seen a classroom, teachers arrived with new textbooks and chalk. National literacy campaigns swept across Libya, with government posters promising that every boy and girl would learn to read and write. By the mid-1970s, the literacy rate had climbed from barely a quarter of the population to nearly 60%, according to UNESCO. Women, once largely excluded from formal education, received scholarships and a place in the classroom. Healthcare, too, became a pillar of the new order. Clinics and hospitals rose in towns that had only ever known traveling healers. The number of hospital beds jumped from 3,000 in 1969 to more than 13,000 by 1980. The World Health Organization recorded a surge in the number of doctors, nurses, and midwives. Vaccination drives reached rural areas for the first time, cutting childhood diseases and raising life expectancy by more than a decade within a single generation. Electricity flickered on in villages that had relied on kerosene lamps. State-funded housing projects replaced mud brick homes with concrete apartments and paved roads stitched together regions once divided by sand and distance. The government's message was clear: oil money belonged to the people, and it would be spent on their future. But Gaddafi's ambitions stretched beyond the immediate. In the 1970s, engineers and planners began drawing up blueprints for a project that seemed almost impossible: a plan to tap the vast aquifers hidden deep beneath the Sahara and bring fresh water hundreds of miles north to the coast. This vision became the Great Man-Made River. Construction would not begin until 1984, but the idea itself captured the imagination of the country. Libyan engineers like Ali Al-Zway led teams that surveyed the desert, drilled test wells, and mapped out the route for what would become the world's largest irrigation project. The promise was simple: to turn arid land into fertile fields, and to ensure that even the most isolated farmers in Fezzan could irrigate their crops. In classrooms and clinics, on construction sites and farms, the early years of Gaddafi's rule brought real, visible change. Teachers taught children who would be the first in their families to read. Nurses delivered babies in hospitals built with oil revenue. Engineers dreamed on a scale that matched the vastness of the desert. For many Libyans, these were years of hope and pride, a belief that the revolution could deliver on its promises. Yet beneath the optimism, new pressures were building, as the drive for transformation began to outpace the ability to sustain it. Throughout the 1970s, Libya's new wealth became a force that reached far beyond its borders. Gaddafi, still in his 30s, positioned himself as a champion of African and Arab liberation. In summit halls from Addis Ababa to Kampala, he arrived not just as Libya's leader, but as a self-styled architect of continental unity. The Organization of African Unity took notice. At the 1973 and 1977 summits, Libyan delegations arrived with suitcases of cash and promises of support for anti-colonial movements. Minutes from these meetings record Gaddafi's pledges in clear terms. Africa, he insisted, must control its own destiny, free from Western interference. The numbers behind these ambitions were staggering. Over the decade, Libya funneled more than $1 billion into liberation struggles across the continent. The African National Congress, fighting apartheid in South Africa, received arms shipments and safe haven in Tripoli. In Angola, the MPLA found a steady backer for their war against Portuguese rule. Leaders like Oliver Tambo and Samora Machel met with Gaddafi in Tripoli, where deals were struck over maps and handshakes. At times, the support was public. Libyan aircraft loaded with aid landed in Lusaka and Maputo. Other times, it was discreet, with cash delivered through diplomatic channels or routed through allied embassies. These gestures won admirers and critics alike. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania praised Libya's willingness to put money and muscle behind the rhetoric of Pan-Africanism. Others, more cautious, wondered whether Gaddafi's largesse was a bid for influence as much as solidarity. The Organization of African Unity's official minutes reflect both gratitude and unease, as some leaders questioned how much control came with the Libyan checkbook. For Gaddafi, the results were immediate. His invitations carried weight, his voice, once confined to Tripoli, now echoed in the capitals of newly independent states. The spectacle of Libya bankrolling liberation struggles fed a growing sense of ideological confidence at home. Oil money, in these years, was not just a tool for national development. It was a ticket to the center of Africa's political stage. The publication of the Green Book in 1975 offered a blueprint for a new kind of society, one that claimed to replace both capitalism and communism with what Gaddafi called the Third Universal Theory. In its pages, he outlined a vision of direct democracy, where the people would govern themselves through popular congresses and committees. The language was dense and absolute. Representation is fraud, one passage declared. The people must govern themselves directly. For years, these ideas were promoted in schools, broadcast on state radio, and recited at public gatherings. Copies of the Green Book appeared on government desks and in roadside stands across the country. On March 2, 1977, the theory became state doctrine. In a ceremony attended by officials and broadcast to the nation, Gaddafi proclaimed the birth of the Jamahiriya, the state of the masses. The Revolutionary Command Council was dissolved. In its place, a network of popular congresses and people's committees was established, promising every Libyan a say in the affairs of the country. But behind the rhetoric of empowerment, a new apparatus of control took shape. Revolutionary committees, loyal to Gaddafi, were given sweeping authority to oversee the congresses, monitor dissent, and enforce ideological purity. Their presence soon extended into universities, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Amnesty International reports from the late 1970s describe an atmosphere of fear, with arbitrary detentions and public punishments for those accused of counter-revolutionary activity. The cost of dissent grew heavier. In April 1977, students at Benghazi University were hanged before crowds, accused of plotting against the revolution. Committees drilled daily, staging loyalty demonstrations and interrogating suspected opponents. The promise of direct democracy hardened into a system where surveillance and coercion became routine. Libya's defiance was not limited to its borders. In April 1986, US warplanes struck Tripoli and Benghazi in retaliation for alleged Libyan involvement in the Berlin discotheque bombing. The raids killed at least 37 people, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. Gaddafi responded with televised speeches denouncing Western aggression, and the state tightened its grip at home. The dream of popular rule, once central to the revolution's promise, had become inseparable from the machinery of control. The Green Book's vision, once idealistic, now served as justification for a surveillance state, one that demanded loyalty, punished opposition, and met challenges abroad with force. Libya's highways, water pipelines, and fractured dreams still bear Gaddafi's signature. As new leaders rewrite his legacy, the line between liberation and repression grows more blurred, both in Libya and beyond. Today, the world debates revolution versus stability, but history warns, idealism unchecked can breed its own shadows. The echoes of those choices still shape the region's future. What lessons do you take from this story? Share your thoughts below.